agenda is the approval of the minutes. Any notes on last week's, or 2 weeks ago's minutes? We have a motion to approve. We have a second. Second. Right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of, oh, is that a question?
No,
You're just kidding. No. All those in favor of approving the minutes for 11/12? Any opposed to the approval of the minutes? Any abstentions? Okay. I just found out Linda is not going to be able to be with us today, so we'll go straight to some.
Okay. Hey everybody, I can mention one thing that I think President Schott would have mentioned had she been here, and that is that she'll be sending out the new PLC group questions, and I think that an email went out about that. Maybe not. Not yet, I guess. She's preparing the email, and it will go out. So, but I think she did mention it at this at the meeting prior. So these are the sort of groups that would be looking at some of the strategic direction. So for SD1, Gen Ed, and some other, I think, really good questions. I think some people have weighed in on those at various intervals. So they're looking good, and I think there's a little something in there for everyone, and that you will probably find a group that you might like to warm up to, you know, nestle up to, and do some good work with your colleagues. So that'll come out in the next few days. My only item was supposed to be presented to you last time, and I wasn't here, so I'm going to do it this time. In the last few months, Janet Frutella, the Vice President for Development, has been working with me on a fundraising policy for faculty specifically, because very often a faculty member or members will be approached by a community member or in a conversation or at a board meeting or whatever random place it is, and since we're not in the position, we can't turn down money necessarily with a straight face, we've got to jump through some hoops to be able to do that properly. So this is a new policy that's very, I think, clear, and it provides guidance to folks who might be approached by a potential donor. And so it lives on the policy website. The president just signed it, and it's titled Campus Fundraising Policy. And you'll see that the policy contact person is the Vice President of Development. So here's the actual policy, and it's just really straightforward. I think it provides good guidance. The second form that you'll find with it is the procedure or process by which you would do this, take this approach. So the questions are very, again, very straightforward. Explain how the proposed project advances the university's strategic plan, describe the potential impact of the project on students in the campus, you know, outline the amount of money you need and why. And so it's just a way for you to, again, get a donor's request to the right people, and then you may or may not be involved in future conversations, but you've at least handed it off and you know it's in good hands, and we've got a process to follow. So I'm happy to send this copy around if folks want to take a look.
It is in the drive as well.
It is in the drive as well, yeah. So that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just a reminder too that we have candidates on campus for two pretty important searches. So we have a Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs. First candidate is tomorrow. And then we have candidates for the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position. So this week and next week, if you can, I know it's busy, I know you're grading, I know it's the worst possible time, but we wanted to get them here while faculty and students were still on campus. And so we had to butt up against the holiday, but we should have everybody here and gone by finals week. So, please, if you can attend a presentation, great. We will videotape the presentations as well, so those will be available to you.
Questions for Sue? All right. was not able to attend advisory council this week, so I will give the report. Most of what we talked about is on the agenda today. A couple of quick things. The biggest was, and there was some emails about this that you probably saw as well, is this in the folder, in the drive, the folder that's marked feedback from directors on post-tenure review. And there's a document in there, PDF, called Responses to Faculty Senate Inquiry Regarding Evaluation Process. So the background on this, especially for those of you who are new on Senate, is that last year the Senate considered some changes to post-tenure review. Those changes, I think, were ultimately voted down, and that led to some additional discussion, I think primarily on the advisory council, of which I was not a member at that time, where they decided to get some answers from division directors on, what are the challenges and issues involved in post-tenure review, and what concerns actually need to be addressed, if any, by our bylaws. And so the advisory council brought that back to us as a discussion, and I think there's general support. There's, I don't think any vote taken, but just a expression of support for that action. And then primarily Dennis and Kimball began work on those questions, but sort of just ran up against the end of the term, and so the questions weren't 100% completed, and kind of slipped through the cracks between the old advisory council, the new advisory council, and at that point, the division director, there was a question of when are the division, the question came to me, when will the division directors get us answers to our questions? So I went and asked the division directors, and they said, we didn't get the questions. And then I found the questions, and they weren't entirely completed, and so I just sort of quickly did some polish on what primarily Dennis and Kimball had already done, and then sent them their way. So that is what those answers are. All the division directors collaborated together on those answers, and I'm just delivering to you exactly what they gave to me. What the decision was on advisory council is that we would get these to you now so that all of you can kind of look over and mull these responses over the break. And then I will invite all of the division directors into Senate next term for a lengthy discussion in which we can ask them directly follow-up questions about their answers to our questions. Any questions? That makes sense? Is it clear now what happened and what you have access to? Okay. And there were a couple of, you'll see under the seventh question, there is kind of an ask here that the division directors are saying that if the bylaws were changed to create some new procedures or authority there, that they think that they would get better results. And so I think there's some substantive issues to discuss with the division directors here that could lead to Senate action. So please do with that. Yep.
Well, since Sue's here, did you have a part of this? Were you part of this question?
Only as
answer?
the messenger. I sort of
Yeah.
ferried requests back and forth. So when Andrew was asked to follow up, or however that first part of that
Yeah.
story went, then he came to advisory council and asked me if I would look into it. I checked with the directors, and that's when they said they didn't get the questions, and I think that's when I came, maybe I put you in touch with them directly, but I was more of a conduit and
Yeah.
not so much an editor.
Okay.
So the last editing the final edits I suggested were when you and Kimball sent me a draft last year, if that's
Right.
kind of what you're wondering.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like Senate and the Provost Office is collaborating on this a little bit.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, but when we handed it off to the directors, it was their
Get their
responsibility then to get the
data, yeah, so get some data.
Yeah.
That was what Kimball
Yes,
was asking.
you're right.
Right?
Yep.
And the fact that we got this far, I think, is really good.
Yeah,
So thank you for your nudging forward on this.
happy to. Thank you for the work you did last year. I'm sorry we dropped it.
No, it's okay. I mean, as long as we get something, I think, we asked it at the beginning of the fall term, so we could like make some sort of progress on it, but the fact that we got something this
Yeah.
term, I think is a good step.
Yeah, I think so too, and thanks to Andrew for kind of picking up the ball and getting down the.
And Sherry is here. Sherry was my main contact, and I guess you coordinated with all the other division directors and helped put this together. So
Yeah, so we put it up on Google Drive and contributed to it, and I was the one who did the final edit and sent it to you.
It's a team effort.
So yeah, so we'll return to this next term, so just make sure that you get
Thank
some
you.
time to read over and think about what kinds of questions you'll want to ask the directors. Another thing that's not on our agenda for today, but just sort of an information item to you all. I had a meeting last week with HR and Matt Stillman about, I was asked to come in and hear them out on the possibility of us observing Veterans Day as a day off. And that led to a larger discussion about how the academic calendar works, and Matt Stillman has decided to create a committee to address not only the question of Veterans Day, but a lot of other kind of larger issues about our academic calendar. For instance, one thing that was discussed was the possibility of expanding spring break to 2 weeks to give faculty more prep time. This committee would be addressing those kinds of issues, and there's no ask right now, but Matt will be reaching out to request a Senate representative of some kind. So when I get that call, I will bring that forward to you. Any questions about that?
Not a question, but we might also discuss Thanksgiving Wednesday because how the characters.
That actually did come up in the conversation, and you know, one of the things that was kind of tied to all these issues is that we have to have a certain number of instructional days, and so that might end up leading to, you know, depending on how many get removed, you might end up having to start on a Wednesday the week before in summer, so.
So, and it's pretty important in some areas in music, we're planning concerts way out, and the start date gets it'd be nice if that happens sooner, like much sooner.
Yeah, I think, Matt, any changes that would happen would certainly not happen before fall 2020. He said that this would be a committee to start discussing what we might do in 2020 and beyond. And he did specifically bring up music and said that he thought there had to be someone from OCA and address the
I'm
music
happy to be
schedule.
on that, because it's important to us.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need to be, but.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting pieces. One of the things I didn't know is that the new online MBA, because they have 7-week sessions in the summer, that we have to
They're all
have.
7 weeks
Yeah, so
throughout
they,
the whole year.
in the summer though, there has to be 14 weeks available for 2 blocks of that. So that takes away some wiggle room instead of you know, cutting into summer versus cutting, you know, into winter break. And so anyway, it's a lot of moving pieces, but he is going to want lots of faculty input on that. The last item was just a little update on the task force, the student evaluation task force. We are now sending out invites to those people who have volunteered and trying to get schedules coordinated. So we got more volunteers than we were requested. I think we got 9 for 5 to 7 spots. And so right now we're just sort of seeing who can actually fit in with the scheduling. And so I think we'll update you at the beginning of next term with the final makeup of that committee. But we got a good range of faculty and several who are doing research on, actively doing research on student evaluation process. That's it for my report. Any questions? All right. So next up, we have Donna Lane for the Inter-Faculty Senate. Is that
Interinstitutional.
Interinstitutional faculty.
So, does everybody know what IFS is?
Probably
Do you
not.
know what IFS
I
is?
think I know what it is.
So, Interinstitutional Faculty Senate, make sure that the legislators are hearing and reflecting what faculty need to know about higher education policy. And so we met last week at Western, not last week, but November 16th and 17th at Western with a long session. Heck presented about 11 new concepts. We're coming up with some concepts. There's some that we're going to focus on that I'd like your input on. Lots of things going on right now. Before I tell you about those, our meeting, Veronica DeJean was present on the phone, who's the Director of Academic Planning and Policy at HEC. We also have started collaborating with community colleges, and James Salt is actually the president of Oregon Education Association of Community College Councils, and he's very cooperative and wants to work together. One of the things that we're seeing is with House Bill 2998, you guys familiar with that? That's the pathways for community colleges and four-year institutions. What's happening is that optimal point in which we're saying students should transfer isn't in line, right, Sue, with the funding models. And so we're trying to work with community colleges to figure out how everybody can stay whole in that process. So we're inviting James to our meeting each time, so that was good. So out of the 11 concepts, again, everybody knows House Bill 2998, right? One of the things when House Bill 2998 came up was, are there going to be resources, money to support either extra advising or either some kind of portal or some way to streamline this? And of course, it passed with no funding at all. And so there's two legislative concepts that the HEC's putting forward right now. One is to get e-transcripts so that we can figure out a way to make this easy. And another one is developing a statewide portal so that we can help with all this transfer, so that the portal kind of moves with the student instead of the student having to ricochet all around. So those are two that we're looking at really close. Also, the accelerated learning standards. Not only do we have the dual credits, but we have sponsored dual credits and assessment learning based credits. And so the HEC is trying to move forward to get those last two standardized. So we need to figure out, is that really what we want? I need feedback from faculty so I can represent SOU well at these. And then we also have adult attainment.
What do you mean by assessment-based
Yeah,
credit?
kind of like
Prior learning credit?
Yeah, but it's at the high school level.
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar to that, yeah. And it doesn't involve aligning with college classes, but we are partners with them in developing what that would look like. And it's if they can meet the objectives, then they would receive credit for that. Another one is the adultainment goals, which I'm really excited about. There's some funding that will go to not only for students, but also to universities, a grant to lessen that gap. And we could get, I think the professional schools would probably be the ones that they're looking at. So business would have an opportunity to develop some programs with some grant money so that we could come up with some programs to get some adults back to help with 40-40-20. And then there's another one that's, again, there were 11, but these are the ones we looked at. Public university finance data. Sue might be able to speak to this more. When schools are evaluated by HEC, they have to ask the individual schools for different financial data. And so what they want to do is just open that line so that they can see it more readily without those stumbling blocks. And it kind of sounds like to a lot of us, we talked about it at our last meeting, a little bit of a slippery slope now that we have our own board, so I'm not sure we quite want to go down that path. So again, your feedback would be great. And then a couple other things we talked about, the OSU Cascade campus. It's starting to be treated like maybe an 8th university, and we need to stay on top of that. They're not getting capital funding. The capital funding is still going through OSU, but they did receive state funding, like an independent school. So we may have an 8th university coming in, so feedback on that as well. And then some of the pathways, the optimal transfer time does not align with the funding model, so we're looking at some of that as well. What else do I have? Some of the things we're going to look at next time is student evaluations, and we're having some presentations from the different faculty members, particularly U of O has been working really hard on this, so they're going to present. And then more collaboration amongst the community colleges, agencies, councils, and committees. And then the legislative actions that the HEC have, whether we're going to support them or ask them, how can we get in, or come up with our own legislative concepts. So if there's any of these things that you guys are seeing that go around, definitely get to me. Yes?
Is there an electronic location that we can point people to kind of summarize what you've given us and ask?
I put the 11 legislative concepts, and one other thing I wanted to talk about is the pathways. The latest draft of the implementation guides are there. All the schools, we've figured out the first 30 credits. The schools are independently doing it. I can put that up, but I'd rather wait. It's still a draft. I think Weston's still figuring those out. But if you go to OregonIFS.org, under our legislative priorities, that's where I'll continue to post stuff.
Okay, thank you
So
very
you
much.
can look there for now. Yeah, the Oregon Transfer Compass is what they're calling that, and so they're starting to align all those classes. And there's two parts to that. One is the foundation courses, and the way I understand it, the foundation courses are if a student doesn't know what degree they want or where they want to go, we have a set of foundation courses that are 30 credits that can move around to any of the Oregon schools. If they know their major and don't know their school, then there's major specifics that we're working on. And right now we're doing business, biology, elementary ed, and English lit. And I don't know all our representatives. I know Joan is for business.
Joan McBee, it's John, I'm blanking on his name, biology chair. Thank you, John Roden. Susan Fowler Mitchell for ed, and Alma Rosa Alvarez for English.
Okay. And so if a student knows their major but not the school, they can then follow that list. If they know their school and not the major, then they're still telling them to contact the school to figure out the best way to transfer in an optimal time. I think. Any questions? That might cover it.
When is your next meeting?
Our next meeting is January 25th in Portland.
I'm just wondering because maybe somebody from the evaluation committee, although you will be on it, most likely, could maybe join you and benefit
Sure.
from that presentation.
Yeah, anybody's welcome.
Any questions?
Just about the resource, I'm not finding it immediately, so perhaps you can just send maybe a link to distribute or something.
Did you scroll to the bottom of the page where it says legislative priorities? OregonIFS.org? Nothing there? Just looked at it for it. No?
I might be looking in the wrong place.
Okay.
I can have it
Yeah, I
checked
can-
offline.
Yeah, I can send, it's a lot of stuff. I can send it. It's all available on the HEC website as well. But what part specifically, and I'll make sure they can
So
get
I'm a new senator, and so trying to communicate everything you just said to my constituents, if I just said, these are the 11 things we're looking at,
Okay.
please go look at these resources, and then let me know if you have any feedback, just facilitates
Sure.
that. So even if you just send me one link to the right place, that's all I
I found it, so we can make sure it goes in there.
Thanks, sorry.
Anything else? No? Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
You.
All right, we have David Bethel here with us from the Faculty Personnel Committee. As you all know, we began the term with a conversation about sort of what had happened with these lost PT guideline revisions, and then Jody came back in, reported kind of what had happened, and now they've been approved by the Faculty Personnel Committee. If you have any questions, I think David's here to answer their process and how they came to their decision. But we would like to request the 2-week rule be waived because anyone going up for tenure next month or next term has the option of choosing either the guidelines that came in on or these guidelines. And I know that there are some faculty who have been going by these guidelines. And I think Precious is one possibly. So,
And they still have to get approved by my
Right.
office, by me, so that's another timing issue for
Right.
you, so I would
so we
support
wanted
the
it to
2-week
get
rule.
to soup quickly. So any questions about any of those approvals?
Just when you said that people going up for tenure can choose which, is that true for promotion too, or is that only true for
I mean, assuming that you, I mean, it depends on when you wanted to start putting your packet together and how you can modify them to whichever set you want. So it's really individual, I think.
So I went through each and every one of these, and I didn't have anything, I guess I could have got it from the Provost website, comparing, but was there just like a general theme that they were all trying to address?
Well, so of the ones that we reviewed, there were a few different reasons for the changes. The vast majority of them were conforming to a new template, so that they look largely uniform across campus. And some departments, I think, had maybe put those forward previously and got that approved, but there was a backlog of getting some of those. So there was, some were purely going from an older format to a newer format. Some had some more minor changes that were, all the changes that we saw, we felt were in line with the goals of the existing guidelines, and that were consistent sort of across departments and also within the individual departments. So there was some of those that were not, they were more tidying up sorts of things, it seemed like. And then the most significant one, I think, is the ones that we addressed where some departments were bringing forward statements regarding service in relationship to the professional faculty. And those are the most substantive changes that were proposed. Those are outlined in the summary. I can go over that in detail now if people are interested.
I guess I'd be curious on what your process was about getting the revisions, or who was involved in the revisions, and what steps did it take before it got to you folks?
I'm not entirely aware of the process until it got to me. And perhaps others in the room can address that. They were handed off to me by the Senate and by Jody Waters, that had established a sort of series of the documents to look at, and then we related those back to previous, if there were previously approved guidelines, compared those.
I think I can help if I may. So Jody was shepherding. There weren't any conversations in our office about any of the changes per se, but it was really more of trying to get them to the next level. And David's right, some of them were just minor changes, just dumping them into the template to standardize them because it was kind of all over the place. We never gave departments a guideline on how to, or guidelines on how to format it. The second ones were just minor tweaks. They were nothing very substantive. And then the more substantive ones, I assume at the program level, were conversations between the faculty and then approved by the program personnel committee or the division personnel committee, depending on which. And then they got a little lost in our office, our world somehow, but nobody was doing anything with them, and that was kind of part of the problem. And then we found them and moved them on to faculty personnel committee. So I would love to hear from the programs too, because my assumption is people had conversations about those changes that were more significant. So, yeah.
Yeah, this was 2 summers ago, and it came down that we wanted to look at the promotion and tenure requirements and guidelines, and so we, as a group in theater anyway, had a discussion at a faculty meeting. Sean and Jackie took those away, did the wordsmithing, sent it via email, and there was a round robin of emails and so forth, and then the final product, and then it went off where it went.
Eventually, man.
Eventually, yes. So that was our process.
And I might add just one additional thing of thinking about process forward on these. We found in reviewing these, there is still a sort of a pretty wide range of approaches, and we started to pick out some really key best practices that we hope to try and highlight in the letter that we sent, of things that could be really useful for a lot of programs. And we might use a couple of those sort of with permission as examples of exemplars, so that if departments go back to further review, they might consider including some of these elements. They just seem to help to clarify things that there's always the challenge of the intent that people are that are after, and then there's the template and the sort of structure of things that sometimes align perfectly, and sometimes you're trying to force things to find the appropriate places. And there were some elegant solutions that came out of that process.
In theater, actually this started back under Chris Sackett, when we were doing promotion and tenure work 8 to 10 years ago. We have a couple professional organizations in theater, the United States Institute for Theater Technology, and then, oh, it flew out of my mind, ATHA, American Theater Education Group. They each have produced like white papers on promotion and tenure expectations at sort of the national level, and I think we cited some of those in our paperwork. So we weren't just reinventing the wheel and aligning our expectations with national expectations.
Because like when they came to you, were the division directors involved in the finalization of what they're putting forward to the committee?
Let's see, I'm not, the final form is what I got from Jody.
Yeah, they're supposed to be approved by division directors. There's a level of approval.
They
Yeah.
came through the division directors.
I think, I'm not sure if I may, and there is one right there, conveniently walking in the door. There may have been on these two that were sent in, Andrew, to you today, there may be one of those that did not get reviewed by a division director. And it could be the psychology one.
Right, that's what.
Yeah. So, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
it is.
Which is not in our folder, this is something that came through.
Right.
And there are a couple that we're still working with departments on, that there were a little bit more significant changes that we would like to see before we feel that they were consistent across the campus. And so those, rather than bring them forward for a down vote, we're working with those departments. Although it might be helpful to know the proper channels, if it should then go from those departments then back through the division directors, that would be important for us to know.
I think it's somewhere on the Provost website, but I'm not going to guarantee that, so I will make sure that you have that information,
Okay,
so that
wonderful.
you can do the right
Thank you.
rerouting.
So they've been reviewed from a consistency perspective across, because the comment about professional faculty not being evaluated under service, is that now going to be true for all departments?
That's one of the real challenges of this, is that, but as far as uniformity, I think uniformity of expectations and clarity, where some of the ones we're working with had more specific challenges that were not, that were problematic. I could go into those details if we need. With the service expectations is something that we are basically, according to our interpretation of the current bylaws, the guidelines that are being put forth by the departments, removing that if someone is at a full 45 ELU for teaching, is sort of consistent with our read of that, but we are not then applying that to all of the other departments. And that's one thing that we're coming back to Senate and saying this is something that needs to be addressed for consistency, and also further checking if the Senate as well agrees with our interpretation of that.
On that point, so there's a parallel conversation going on right now in bargaining with, between the two teams about service for professional track faculty. And I just want to mention that because it's ongoing at this point, and I get concerned about competing recommendations.
Sure. Yeah.
So I just mentioned that because that is happening as we speak.
Yeah, and we were aware that, not of details of those conversations, but we were aware that there was conversations happening on that
Yeah.
in that
Right.
field as well.
Yes.
But if I could just add a comment, I think because they're actually kind of aligned. I can see the concern about not having competing documents or whatever, but the intent, the both things I think is the same, which is, you know, if you have 44 or 45 ELU of teaching load, there should not be an expectation that you have to also do service beyond that.
And that's being discussed at the bargaining table,
Right.
was my only point. So I think it's up to the faculty to decide sort of who they want those conversations to occur with.
The other conversation to that piece is you do have a division of the graduate studies that has only 44, 45 professional ELU folks. And university studies, especially seminar, is asked to participate in so many Senate committees that it would be interesting if that does happen to shift without some type of shift in loading expectations, that you would have a whole division not represented across campus. So it's complex.
Any other questions regarding the proposed changes?
Well, I'm still thinking about the process, because I think that this is like one of the most important things that we can get right, you know, when we have the opportunity to get it right. And I was involved in the first iteration of what's out there now as on faculty personnel committee, and I've also benefited from, in the promotion process as a professor, from clear guidelines in these expectations. So education had really clear guidelines, and I think I benefited from those. And so I think it's an enormous benefit to the faculty member to have those things be clear enough so that there's no interpretation down the road, whether it's by the program, the faculty person, the FPC, or the provost, so that they are in a quandary, or that they know where to put their efforts year after year.
Are you saying that there's any in here that are not clear?
No, but I don't support the 2-week rule waiving. And so that's because they've just been thrown at us right now. We're just like, what's going on?
Well, you had 2 weeks to look at it.
What is the process? I just want to make sure that we are comfortable as a group about the process, because these are likely to be in place for another 5 years. So, you know, if the FPC bringing them forward to us now, that's what we're doing now, right?
Correct.
If they're really comfortable with their process, you know, and they've been signed off on, you know, by the programs and the division and the chairs, you know, so that, because these things are in stone for about 5 years.
Right.
It's a big deal.
So just to remind you, everyone, that at the beginning of the term, there was quite a bit of concern about the fact that these had not been approved for a year. These were all approved by their programs over a year ago. And they've been sitting in the provost's office for a year, waiting for them to come to faculty personnel committee. And we're not going to, you know, relitigate that.
Okay, well, that's good.
But everything that you have has been reviewed has been agreed upon by the program, by the chair, by the division director, by the faculty personnel committee. And I think it does attest to that they are being thorough, because there are at least 2 programs who are not coming forward to us right now that they've reviewed and asked for more work to be done. So just want to be clear that what's here has gone through that process.
But there's an exception in here too, in terms of the summary that they put forward. There's the exception of one of the programs about they're challenging the service commitment.
This is is in relationship to the service commitment for professional faculty.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in relationship to three of the departments put forward those proposed changes.
Right. So that's not the same for every one of these, right?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Are the programs that he just mentioned, the 3 that are asking for different considerations and service expectations, are they part of what we're asked to voting approving?
yes.
Yes.
So we would be approving the exceptions to service.
But those have already been, okay.
So one of those departments is CCJ.
Yeah.
And the only service expectation we had is in order to align more with the bylaws a year and a half ago, we had a discussion that if we have a professional faculty member who's teaching 44 ELUs, that's all allocated towards teaching and teaching only and advising. There's one ELU of service. And so in our blanket statement, we said that departmental service will fulfill that. There's no other requirements beyond just departmental service, no committees or Senate work or anything of that fulfilled our service expectation
Yeah,
for
well,
somebody teaching 44 ELU.
Okay, I would say that's reasonable, but does that apply then across campus?
No.
Each department has looked at this individually and said, we think in our department, this is how the service should go. And so that's what's coming forward is each individual one.
I know, I'm saying, is that
That's
a
not
good
like
process?
yeah.
Is it fair? Is it something the Senate as a body is going to agree to?
Maggie's had her hand up for a while.
Because we represent the whole campus.
Yeah, so relative to the discussion, it seems like the bargaining team represents the whole campus, and I just want to make sure our vote doesn't somehow undercut
No.
them.
The bargaining agreement supersedes anything we do.
So, I understand where you're at. I think, and maybe I'm misreading what you're saying, but I personally would think that there should be uniformity in that if there is 40, if somebody's teaching 44, that their only requirement should be one ELU. And I think that's kind of what the recommendation is. As a Senate body, there should be a discussion, but I think to Sue's point, that's also being discussed in negotiations. So you can't really discuss that until the CBA has been finalized, and everything else is just conjecture at that point. If we try to have a uniform, because from what I understand, when we first made these 7-8 years ago, teaching was kind of standardized across campus, and service was standardized across campus, and scholarship was left to the programs to determine, how to do this. And as somebody that's been on faculty personnel committee, it's like, wow, I didn't know what scholarship was in theater arts or anything else. And so that's where the responsibility lies in the programs. So
Right.
that is still there. And I'm okay with the process. The only process question I have is if it goes from program to division director to FPC, but if it was like, it was at the does it go from director to the provost office then to FPC?
No, it only came to our office because we were shepherding it through to the next
Because
stage.
Jody's the administrative contact, right?
For faculty personnel committee. No, I'm sorry, she's not. Nobody, there is no administrative contact on FPC. For the faculty development committee, she is. And so I think by default, she was people were sending her things so that they would get to the next level. No one in my office has made any evaluation at all. It'll come to me after Dave says it does. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the comment was made that most of the people in USEM have high teaching loads. Are we concerned that these three will set a precedence that they will want to follow, and that's how we'll lose those service people? Is that kind of what you're
Is this
saying?
the question?
Yeah, I guess it's a question.
I think that whatever folks decide, that is certainly a faculty decision. What I would hate to see is that a whole division wouldn't be represented, because the faculty are all professional faculty. And so
But
unless
what we're approving would only be 3 departments, not all professional, so that doesn't seem fair. But I agree, if we pass that, it sets the precedence for all those people also to kind of do that same thing. So I'm wondering why we are loading people so high that they can't do the rest of their job.
Or just more than
That's
their
why
job
the
requires.
faculty bargaining team is.
Right,
talking
so,
with
but
the
we're like trying to
administration.
fix something that,
So I think we as Senate should really steer clear of the bargaining table because that's happening somewhere else. So the bylaws allow every program to define their service, teaching, and research expectations to clarify based on the discipline and the expectations of that program, and that's what this is. So these are revisions to You know, you can go to what, the folder that's already existent of every program, and you're gonna see a lot of differences. They aren't gonna match apples to apples, because
Right.
they're all already very different. So this is an update of that. I do wanna remind everyone that for many programs, they thought that because they had approved this, that their faculty were working to these guidelines. And so there are many people who are gonna be going up for promotion and tenure in January who think that they're working to these guidelines and may be confused when they realize that the old, February. I knew that. So, you know,
Well,
we gotta move on one way or the other soon, so if we're not comfortable waiving the 2-week rule, then we're not comfortable, but we do have other things on the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good point, the faculty have been working on this, but I don't think that we should ever make decisions because it's an inconvenient timeline. I mean, I think we have to, it's a process, if people are uncomfortable because they think that we haven't had enough time to discuss this, it's true, they've had the documents in the drive for 2 weeks, but this is the first time we've ever discussed it as a group. And so if people want more discussion or more time after hearing this stuff and thinking about what it might mean, I don't think we should say, well, you know, these programs passed it a year ago even though nobody discussed it, so we should just rubber stamp it.
I agree, but what will happen, just so we know, we can't change these. So we'll be sending them back to Personnel Committee, we'll be sending them back to programs, and so we're talking about months before we see these again.
Would we be able to consider the ones that don't have the touchy subject involved and then make sure all except for the 3 exception departments, we can make sure that they're on the right path? But I mean, maybe we need to talk more about like what precedent saying that that's okay for them sets for the rest of the university, especially if we can't, you know, step on the other toes of the other committees. You might want to try to separate it.
What are the 3 that have that?
CCJ, history, and political science.
But I also want to add, there's also psychology and somewhere it got lost along the way, but they did the same thing.
Those are
Did what same thing?
They put the same condition about service expectations for professional service. It just got lost somewhere along the way.
It didn't go to the commission.
Right.
But there's 11, so we can still do 5.
But psychology isn't in here, right?
No, it's not, because it didn't get into that process. My point is though that you know, as of right now, each department has the right to determine what those expectations are and then pass them up the chain for approval. I don't think we have a process whereby one department can say one thing and then we say, well, if they say that, there's an implication that has an implication across the whole campus. So now everybody has to do that or nobody can do that. I mean, I don't think we have that process. So I think what we're doing now is approving the individual changes that individual departments have made. Right? That may not be consistent across all programs.
Which
but
we
I'm
have.
not sure, but I'm not sure that's a reason for not doing it because it's not consistent across all programs.
The way I see it, every program is allowed to create what they want to create.
Right.
Correct, right? They created it, they told us what they're doing. And if they have that right to create it, then we're done. They're just
No.
going to show us.
It has to be approved
Okay.
by
No,
provost office ultimately.
well, it'd be approved by us. I mean.
There's levels of approval, that's why we're discussing it.
Okay.
Because if it was a obvious approval, then we wouldn't need to discuss it, we just rubber stamp it.
Gotcha, all right.
And the same with the faculty personnel committee, they should be reviewing for either consistency or inconsistency and then sending it back to them if it's sort of like way out of line.
Yeah.
So it's not just whatever the program wants.
Mark.
So
Okay, yeah.
putting words in Dave and Brian's mouth, which I've done many times. We don't need this on the bargaining table. If the department's going to change it so that professional track people don't have to do service, just do it in your own department, problem solved. As long as the provost put it.
Oh, I thought you were still speaking with my words.
Making the assumption that if we say they don't have to do service, Sue will gladly sign it.
Well, I do have a question, if you don't mind. When we did this whole process of the faculty, the expectations for promotion and tenure, I think there was an assumption that the teaching and service pieces were all agreed upon at that time. And that it was the discipline-specific expectations around research and scholarship that were really, that was where the conversations took place. What for your program, in your discipline, is the appropriate level of work that needs to be done before you're promoted to the next level. And so I'm struggling with the intent behind that, and then sort of where we are today. I don't have a problem with revisiting teaching and service, but I don't think that was ever sort of put out there for each program. I think it was kind of understood that those were going to be the professorial, those were going to be the professional, and then you guys go back to your program and hash through your disciplinary specific expectation. And I'm going to look at Sherry, because that's, and maybe Lee, that's what I remember.
So that's what I've been trying to bite my tongue and not say, is that we approved a fundamental template that was grounded in the bylaws. And then departments were able to ask disciplinary specific clarifications to that, not turn it up on end. So it's not like you can put anything you want in teaching. You have the basic teaching outline. You could clarify how those different aspects materialize in your program. But you can't just throw out the whole teaching template that came from the bylaws. And that was the instructions I took to my division, because I went to each of my chairs, talked about how well they did or did not conform, and those that didn't spent the fall of, I think it was 16, reworking them. And I found I had one program, CS, that never did expectations. So I really want something approved before any goes up for so there was a lot of thought, worked through programs, chairs came to me, compiled, went to Provost's office. I don't think there is a lot of lack of proper process in this, but I do think the main role of Faculty Personnel Committee was to assure that there was at least some equitable interpretation of the bylaws across programs.
Which, and just to respond to that briefly, is that I think that was definitely our intent with this, and we acknowledge that this particular issue is something that is very much causing inequity by it being potentially approved, and in the sense that, well, if these get approved, then other departments may want to then revisit and revise, which of course they would have the right to do that in an appropriate process. So it's, in a sense, we acknowledge both the intent of the programs here, as well as the fact that it's going to cause some tumult by either being approved or at least bring up the issue. Justin?
So if, hypothetically, the bargaining team conversation goes forward, and if in the next CBA, hypothetically, there is a ceiling on what professional faculty are expected to do in terms of service, if that is, set by the CBA, does that require us to then go back to the bylaws and to each department and have them then conform with that CBA? So I don't really know how that process works.
Sure. The only part that I wanted to add with that is that in the case of these three departments that we've reviewed so far, that language has actually just been addended sort of to a table as a paragraph, saying basically a statement saying this is our interpretation of the 44, 45 ELU and service requirements. So in a sense, I don't think it would be very challenging that the bylaws would supersede that and sort of revise that language or adopt that language depending on the outcomes of that process is my interpretation, but I'm sure there are people that are more versed in that.
Right. And I would make just this argument and I've read history, political science, and ours. We're not getting rid of service. We're not changing service. And I'll use Sherry's words. We're clarifying service for what the expectation is for somebody who's teaching 44 ELUs. And all it really says is the remaining non-teaching ELUs, priority is given to departmental service tasks. So we're just, that's one example. And I'm almost certain that history and political science is verbatim. And so really all that was doing was clarifying the service expectations for somebody in that situation. We're not removing service, we're just clarifying that departmental services for us is completely, acceptable for that one remaining ELU of non-teaching.
Sherry had her hand up.
Okay.
The table in the bylaws does state university service is part of the expectation at each level. So I do think that is changing what that table is. But I don't want to muck the waters up. I thought someone had suggested splitting the 3 from the rest and maybe voting on them separately.
So we've eaten up 10 extra minutes, so I've either asked for, at this point, a motion of some sort, or we'll table the whole thing and come back in January. But if anyone wants to make a motion, we can indeed split them up if you want to. So are there
I just had a
any
question for Brian here. So are you saying in your what you just mentioned that service is replacing ELUs?
No.
When they're short?
No. What I'm saying is for a professional faculty member in our department, they have 45 ELUs, just like you and I do if you're, but for tenured track individuals on the professorial, 36 ELUs is allocated for teaching. For instructors, it's 44 or 45 ELUs for teaching.
Okay.
So 44 out of their 45, if they're teaching, 11 4-credit classes over the course of an entire term, that's 44 out of 45. They have 1 ELU remaining. They have no scholarship expectations. So they have 1 ELU for service at the university. And so our department felt that departmental service is part of the university. It helps our program. And we didn't want, people taking on 4 different committees and not being paid for, doing more than their job actually says that they're required to do. That was our only way of clarifying our service, that we felt that as a small department with a lot of majors, we have a lot of departmental needs that we can't spread out in larger departments where everyone can do a little bit. We just have a few faculty and still have the same program expectations, and so that was our clarification.
So I just wanted to add on that, just to reiterate what Lee said, and that's great in programs that have both professional and professorial track people, but in Division of Undergraduate Studies, University Seminars specifically, we don't have professorial. We have 1 person, but that's an anomaly. So nobody from our whole program would, if it were determined that we wouldn't do service or that we weren't loaded for that, we wouldn't have representation on any committee. So that's where the sticky part comes for us. So I think we almost.
So this is why it's a bargaining.
Yes, and so I think we have to. So maybe I'll make a motion. Why don't we consider all but those 3 programs for approval today?
So we would need a 2-week rule waiver first. So do you move to waive the 2-week rule?
Sure.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on just waiving the rule? It doesn't mean there's rule. All right, all those in favor of waiving the 2-week rule, please show your hand. All those against waiving the 2-week rule, please raise your hand. Anyone abstaining from voting on this matter? All right, so the 2-week rule is waived.
So now I'll motion to approve the programs excluding those 3 that have the exceptions with regard to professional faculty service expectations.
And that was philosophy, political science, and history?
CCJ.
Sorry, CCJ.
Do we need to put philosophy in there too, even though it got lost?
Yeah.
No, that's
So
So it's history, political science, and CCJ.
CCJ.
Correct.
So your motion is to approve all but
the
those.
3 exceptions. Yeah.
Do we have a second? All right. Any further discussion?
My only thing that I would say, and this is one of the premises for waiving the 2-week rule, is it's not fair to the faculty members who are using this approved template from the departmental, and now you've excluded 3 departments. That's all. That's not even a discussion.
Wait, can you say that again?
So one of the reasons why we should waive the 2-week rule for making this decision was that some faculty members who are going up for promotion, I'm already promoted, doesn't bother me, but they were using this template that was approved at the departmental level. And so we're asking as a Senate to approve these because it's not fair to them. And so for these 3 other departments now that we've just excluded, if we vote this way, we're now treating those faculty members that may be going up to
Could the,
Split them out.
that's what I was gonna say,
Okay.
could we,
So
could
maybe-
we
Have a
instead
second
vote
possible
on
motion,
just
okay.
the research?
That's right, that's what I would do. So then they can continue.
I mean, I'm all for approving all of them, so I'm not gonna, I'm want to approve those 9 and just, if not, I'll make a motion for the second vote then too, so that's my only discussion.
So do you want to amend the motion?
So clarify what the amendment would be.
So it would be to approve all but 3 in full.
Yes.
And the research component
And
of
teaching.
the other 3, and teaching, I guess.
Yeah,
Research and teaching.
Sure.
Yeah.
And improving the templates. The template.
I,
You can
yes,
say
I can.
You can stick with it. But is that
Yeah.
the motion?
Yeah,
So wait,
sure.
research and teaching for the 3 and
Yes.
everything for the others.
So just the service would be held out
Just the
for
service
later
change.
approval.
Their request to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Would we also
okay
then
with
be able to have a vote afterwards separately on fully approving the 3?
Suppose you could still make that motion, yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that it's clear that we would.
I think the emotion is
Oh.
approving the 9 programs, just the whole 9
Yeah, I
programs.
think maybe rather
Let's
than
just
having
do
2
that.
things in one.
You're
motion.
we're approving all 9 programs with the exception of history, political science, and CCJ.
And then come a second motion.
Maybe.
Right, right, right. So we have
I
the,
want to clarify, I need to
I know,
clarify this,
this is
I'm trying to write this down, and I'm getting a little bit confused. Okay, so the 3 that are not approved completely, what is happening? Are they going back?
They're not on this motion.
But, so they're, and, right, so they're,
so we're motioning, a motion just to approve all but the 3. We're going back to the original.
I mean, can I,
the research and
actual
teaching?
clarification would be, can we approve art faculty, comm, computer science, EMDA, ESP, FLL, philosophy, and theater? Can we approve their promotion and tenure package, all of it, just all of those
So we're
programs?
not doing this splitting things up, okay.
I believe that was my original
Yes,
motion.
yes,
Yeah.
that's the original.
So there's no amended motion.
And did someone
Yeah.
second? Someone
Yes,
did?
Lori.
Lori
Yeah.
did. So that is still
Yeah.
an active motion. Is there any further discussion on that?
So I retract my amendment.
All right.
And we can go with that one.
All right, yeah. All those in favor of approving all of those program changes other than the 3 that have been the source of contention?
Okay.
All those opposed to approving those changes? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Any other motions that we want to consider, or?
So would like to make a motion to approve political science, history, and CCJ's, their teaching scholarship and their promotion and tenure package.
The whole thing?
The whole thing.
Oh, all right.
Wait, the circus also?
Yes.
He's going there, all right.
Oh.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All right.
Well, I'll make a comment just so we're clarifying here what we're voting on. We're sort of voting on their exceptionality here, right? So we're basically saying their exceptionality is okay, and which might set a precedent for other programs to do the same. I don't want to use the word willy-nilly, but I might.
Go crazy. Well, and then
It's a
just
family
out of-
show.
And then to be overturned.
Just like replacing a senator that might be in a bar somewhere, you know, like, let's get rid of our service for ELUs, so let's just exchange them. So, I mean, I think that's the precedent that might be set if we approve it now, where we might recommend that they go back and think about how they might make a different proposal.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on what would happen if we didn't vote on this today.
we could bring it up, I put it on the agenda again next.
Right, because so we would give people more time to think about it, take it back to their faculty, talk about what this might mean. Because we did split it apart originally for a reason, so that the ones that were really minor would just get approved, and these would have longer to kind of percolate.
You first.
So again, as the president said, there's a few people that are going up for promotion under department. This was their guidelines, and it's not fair to them if this is what we said, here was your expectations. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, but if it worked for 9 others, and this was approved by the program, it was approved by the division director, it was vetted and thoroughly discussed at faculty personnel committee and approved, and then brought to us for this discussion. And so I think, and I've been on their committees, and I would make the argument that they're thorough, they're diligent, they're looking, they've already given examples of ones that didn't meet muster that they're sending back that aren't on here for a nay vote. And so.
Mark has kind of been.
We're just saying that Senate thinks it's an okay idea.
So goes to Sue.
Sue still has to decide.
What does happen if we say?
We're not really approving it, we're just saying we'd like her to.
We recommend.
We're not approving it, we're still discussing.
Okay, well, but if a change comes to you, Sue, and you don't like that change, would it go through the entire process again, or can you then deal directly with that program?
I can deal directly with the program. But I do think that Dan has a point that's relevant to your question.
Yeah, and I have not had enough time to fully check on this, but I'm not sure that they did come through the division director, not that that would change it much. Because what's happened in between when they were submitted, whether they came through me or not, I think there's been more discussions about, I am on the bargaining team, so I know that this has been actively discussed over the last couple of months, and so I'm very leery of saying, too much about what's been discussed. But also too, if that's, I just haven't had a chance to look back to see whether or not those actually came through as possible, because it's been a long time. I know that I haven't seen psychologists, and I know that's not on the table, but it makes me a little bit concerned about the process that we've been using for this.
That's my point. That was my original point about the process. And so I'll also say to Brian's point here, and anybody else that's concerned about the differences between interpretations of version 1 and version 2, the faculty personnel committee is not, it's not a bunch of constitutionalists. You know, they're not by the letter of the law. I mean, their consideration of the faculty benefits. You know, they're gonna, I believe they're gonna give every leeway where if they have to interpret the old version versus the new version, I think they can make that discretion. So it's not so dire, I don't think, if it's not clear, because they're not constitutionalists. I've been on those committees, that committee, and you know, it's all under consideration. That's the purpose of the group. It's not just to like read the letter of the law.
All right, well, I think everyone has heard enough to make a decision. If you vote no, I'm going to put it on the agenda with lots of discussion time in January, but we need to move on. So there was a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving history, political science, and CCJ in full, please indicate so by raising your hand. All those opposed to approving history, political science, and CCJ as written, please indicate so. Any abstentions to the vote? Okay, so the motion passed. All right, thank you all. We're going to move on to our next piece of business. Jeff Beaton is here to talk about HB 2871.
Thanks, I think I'll just speak from back here. So House Bill 2871 has some requirements on how courses that have low cost and no cost course materials are reported. And I'll just read the relevant section of the law. Each public university and community college shall prominently designate courses whose course materials exclusively consist of open or free textbooks or other low-cost or no-cost course materials. The course designation required by this section must appear in the published course descriptions that are on the internet or otherwise provided to students at the time of course registration, including on the campus bookstore course materials list that is provided for the course. So basically, we need to develop a mechanism and a process to identify courses that have low book costs and no book costs. Those are the two basic categories. One of the questions is, how do we define low cost? Oregon peer institutions are kind of split. Some of them are saying $40 and less. Others are saying $50 and less. None of the truths have reported exactly what they're doing, but Portland State is at 50, Oregon State is at 40. Community colleges are kind of divided. 8 of them are doing 40 and 3 are doing 50. One of the things that I'm here to talk to you about is get some feedback from you on where you think it makes sense to have that low cost level. If you have any thoughts on what it would be a good level for here.
Let's do 45.
I was struck that it was 40 or 50.
Yeah, well, Jeff, do you have any history you can give to us as to how we got to 40 and 50 in the first place?
So the law provides zero guidance whatsoever about what that designation is. What is it? It's up to the institution. I don't know what the process is that other institutions have gone through to figure out what that number is. Open Oregon, which is kind of running the OER grants and running this process and making sure that the institutions are in compliance, has a spreadsheet where they're documenting, we're self-reporting what we're doing and why, but it doesn't say how we came to that decision of $40 or $50. My guess is someone said 40, someone said 50, and everyone else said, okay, one of those looks good to me. That would be my guess.
Do you have any information on like what the average textbook is at the bookstore?
So I know from working with programs that it varies extremely widely by program. Coming up with an average number would be, I think, fairly meaningless. I could get that information for you, but because there is so much variation across programs and how they use course materials, whether it's formal textbook, whether they're using novels and plays and things like that, or not using any materials at all, it's really hard to say.
I think it also, like, we should take into consideration how many books per course that are required, because sometimes it might be a $40 book, one $40 book, or in another course it might be a student getting like 3 $40 books too.
So the way this is being defined, so we're talking about more or less print materials and any access codes that maybe go along with the textbook. So we're talking about textbooks, we're talking about, this would include the electronic, we're talking about lab manuals, all printed materials, and then access codes. It would be the total sum of all the items, not just, each individual needs to be under, say, $40 or $50. It's the total cost of required materials for the course. It wouldn't include things like calculators or art supplies. That's not really within the scope of this. The bill is really about textbooks and that kind of thing. And another note is that this would be the lowest cost option. So let's say you're requiring a textbook that new is $100, but used is $40. We would base the cost of attendance at the $40 level rather than the $100 level. That seems just appropriate. There's no real guidance in the law about that, but that seems appropriate. What's the lowest amount that a student could pay to take the course and have all the required materials?
So let's take an informal survey. Who thinks low cost is 50 is better? Just kind of see show of hands.
I'm saying it's realistic.
Right.
That's realistic.
And who thinks 40 is a better low cost?
Lower.
And some people do not have an opinion. Right.
Is it required that so many of our courses have to meet the standard?
No, there's
or
nothing
we
at
just
all
identify
about the number of courses. It's definitely, obviously, the intent of the legislation is to provide the use of more low-cost materials. Because students will be able to search in the catalog or in the registration, hey, I want to find all the courses that have no cost materials. They'll be able to search that. they'll be able to search for all the courses that have low cost. So there's definitely an intent to kind of put a little bit of heat on trying to get faculty to adopt low cost materials. So that's definitely the intent, but there's no requirement that, X number of courses taught or that kind of thing.
Paul?
I was just going to ask if there's been any consideration from student perspectives of what counts as low cost, like at these other institutions or institution. Like I would imagine students would want the $40 as the low cost.
They would definitely want the low cost. Actually, I was talking to the Osberg folks about some of this legislation last week, and yeah, there's definitely a preference for as low a low cost, but there's also, low cost may be great, but free is better. $40 times 4 courses starts to add up, or $50 times 4 courses starts to add up. So whatever we decide what that low cost cutoff is going to be, I think there's going to be continued encouragement for free.
And Jeff is coming back next term to talk to us more in depth about the process by which this information is going to be collected. And it's going to be very important that faculty are all reporting what resources they're using. So
I was hoping, can I talk about that today?
we were very behind schedule, so if you can give a very brief.
The brief overview is that we're going to do this through the bookstore, which means that faculty are going to need to get the information about their course materials to the bookstores earlier than 3 weeks, because registration opens, it opened 9 weeks before for this coming term, it's going to open 6 weeks before for the next term. In order to be compliant, the bookstore needs the information before registration, because that's how the law is written. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the bookstore, the way they frame their letter, makes it seem like they only want information if you actually having them order materials for you. That's going to change. They want to know everything. If you're using all internet stuff or you're not assigning any course books, they want to know that too. That'll help them give us the data that we need to comply with the law. But the other thing is they want it because it helps them, because then when a student says, hey, I don't see anything about this course on the shelf, they can actually answer the question. So that'll be really, really helpful for the bookstore as well. So we'll need that information much sooner than the 3 weeks that the bookstore requires. Basically before registration starts in the term. Short version.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Mariah, you're up.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Raya Safety. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the coordinator for the Women's Resource Center, and I also lead the majority of all of the sexual violence prevention work that happens on our campus. And I came in to talk to you today about a policy that I've been working on with a number of folks for a while now, and I wanted to bring it to this group and hear your thoughts, and with the hopes of submitting it to the president in the nearest future, and hopefully eventually becoming a policy for SOU. So as you may know, SOU is really leading the nation in how we respond when sexual violence happens on our campus or with our students. And we are really working on our prevention efforts as well. And so this policy, the proposed policy, I believe you all have it in your...
So I just discovered that it got put in the wrong place. I'm moving it in there right now.
No,
I'm
that's
so
okay.
sorry.
So in a nutshell, the policy is called the Sexual Violence Prevention Training and Assessment Policy. It's really just holding our university accountable to saying that we will provide sexual violence prevention to students, staff, and faculty on different types of basis. So new hires need to go through our online module within so many days, which some of those things already are happening through our HR. Students will be required to go through our online module. Staff and faculty need to do 2 hours every 2 years of prevention training. I'll be really honest, this policy is kind of a low bar. A lot of universities have policies like this or even more robust than ours. We currently don't have a policy at all that requires the institution to do prevention work, but we do prevention work, and we would like to be able to have a policy to hold us to an even higher standard. So I guess I don't really know if there can be conversation if nobody has seen the policy. It's okay. Maybe what would you suggest, folks?
Would you want to? Is there any part of it that you want to recount?
I mean, the basic pieces of the policy. So the whole first thing is just definitions that are taken directly from our conduct, our SAT 007 policy. The essential pieces of the policy is that we're committed to ending sexual violence, harassment, stalking, and other forms of misconduct on our campus and in the community. So to this end, we'll do these things. So it's about when we would have students go through the online module, and that ongoing prevention education will be offered at faculty request and quarterly on campus or annually. That all faculty and staff are required to complete 2 hours of training upon hire, and then they're also required to go through 2 hours every 2 years. So it's not really a lot, but just to keep folks engaged, to really understand our reporting processes, those types of things. There is a piece in the policy that's specifically around academic programs. So each program on campus is encouraged to proactively address within their curricula strategies for preventing sexual violence, harassment, and misconduct in the larger discipline, providing students with training and tools they can use throughout their professional careers. I want to be really clear. So you are being encouraged to proactively address within your curricula. So this isn't requiring you to make major changes, to just be thinking about some of the things that might impact students in your disciplines here on campus and as they move out into the world of work. And then also there's a piece around all student fee funded entities, so all clubs would be required to go through training, and that SAU would be committed to doing a climate survey every 4 years to assess what the climate's like in regards to this issue, as well as we can ask students questions about their belief systems, and if we ask them when they come here and then we ask them again 4 years later, we can get some data and information on whether or not the prevention efforts are having impact on belief systems, which is really what prevention work is about in terms of trying to change the culture. So that's kind of in a nutshell is sort of what the policy is talking about. I don't know, Andrew has worked with me on this, and he's a part of the Violence Prevention Response Advocates Prevention Subcommittee that I chair, and so he has actually been doing some of this work already within his classes, and I don't know if you want to just give a little...
Well, on the letter D, we in our Digital Cinema Foundation class, which is a class that all of our, at least the digital cinema students all take, it's where they learn a lot of professional practices around film, how production works, and so we've added in that a module on harassment, kind of responding directly to sort of Me Too sort of news and media, and so we're really making sure that sexual harassment and consent are addressed as professional expectation stuff, that it's not just something that we think about outside of the work environment, that it's actually intrinsic to it as much as any other prevention skill. How much of this, in terms of, I know you said we don't have a policy now, but is this, would the policy change much of what we're currently doing, or is this, it's pretty close to what we are already trying to do?
I think that there's a couple of different answers to that. There isn't currently any policy outside of like what HR requires for new hires, and maybe Sue has more information around this, but in terms of what we offer to our students, our online module is sent to them, but it's not required, and there's no language that it's required, and actually we've had an incredibly low response rate this year with incoming students. And there's fear of requiring it would then lead to them not enrolling in classes, right? And so, but I want to be also really clear that a lot of universities do require their students to go through a few modules prior to starting classes. It's a pretty common practice that happens. So I think it's both about trying to kind of raise the bar on our campus a little bit in terms of what's being required, but also to say that like there will be a prevention team that's doing this work, and this is how often it will happen. Because currently there is also not a prevention team, and so we're kind of just trying to, as a community, bolster those efforts with the hopes of this policy being a part of that. Any questions for me? I know it's difficult to discuss something that you haven't read. It's really only like 4 pages, so hopefully it can be something that you read soon.
Bring you back.
How long is the online module for students?
It's close to like 90 minutes or so, up to 2 hours, kind of depends. You can't, I mean, you really have to engage with it. You can't let it run and open another browser, so it does sort of hold them accountable to do it. I don't know what current numbers are. I need to check with Jody, but I know that a few years into the quarter, we had like less than 10% of our incoming students had completed it. Yeah.
So this is towards how often are faculty required to go through the sexual harassment thing? I know it's in your FBAR.
Every 2 years, and new faculty right away. So, and then there's a box on your FBAR that you check for the accountability.
But it's just every other year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm back to it.
Does that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty good system now, I think that, and I think that most people are not opposed to it. It's actually because we got a better a program that was really more engaging and up to date and just seemed better. I think everybody thought it was just higher
So it's
quality.
the online module that the one you go through?
Yeah, but it's usually only, last time I took it, it was mostly sexual harassment or any type of harassment.
You can choose more if you want. It's available through HR.
Even with the sexual
You
violence
can
prevention?
do like there's ages and stuff, and there's some other stuff that is more educational.
But I didn't know if we just incorporated it into the sexual harassment policy, which is kind of what we're doing,
Title
the
IX.
program.
We also have I mean, if you haven't done it, we have a new one pretty recently, within the last couple of years. It's a different program than what we had in the past, which is much better, I think, and more engaging.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but
Can I say one more thing
Yes,
real quick?
please.
I also just, you're probably aware, but there are major changes to Title IX that are being proposed at a federal level right now that will greatly impact the ways in which universities respond. Like, for example, we would no longer be responsible to respond to any type of sexual violence that happens off campus, which is like the majority of what happens. So I really encourage you to think about ways how we as a community can commit to prevention, because prevention is really an important piece of students having really good experiences here. And keep your eyes out. There will be some open forums and ways that we're going to try to encourage folks to take action around Title IX. There will be a public comment period for 60 days, opening really soon. So I will keep you all posted.
thank you, Brian. I'll bring you back.
Thanks.
All right, any announcements from new business?
Again, this Thursday from 6 to 8 over at Meese Auditorium, we're going to do a presentation on our bikepacking adventure.
The chemistry club got a honorable mention from the American Chemical Society, which is the national chem organization, for how many events they put on last year. So they were recognized for I'm their advisor. My name was
Well, as the last order of business, I wanted to recognize Dominic, who this is his very last session.
Oh, Charles, too, right? Is it your last?
What? No,
1
he's-
year?
He's not going
Still
anywhere.
here till June.
And then Maggie, this is the last of your temporary term, isn't it? We think?
Not really sure.
Okay, to be determined, but possibly a farewell as well to Maggie. So thank you both for your service and all your work. You're still here, right? Because I've heard that Prakash is not coming back.
Oh, Prakash is just extended. We've got candidates coming on campus in January for the Honors College search.
So I guess. All right.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. Adjourned.